God's Word. And if you're following along in a Bible, you're going to find there's a couple places I skip a verse or two just to tighten it up a little bit. John chapter 4, starting at about verse 3. Jesus left Judea and went again to Galilee. He had to travel through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, worn out from his journey, sat down at the well. It was about noon. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. "Give me a drink," Jesus said to her. "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" she asked him. For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If you knew the gift of God and who is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would ask him, and he would give you living water." "Sir," said the woman, "you don't even have a bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get this living water? You aren't greater than our father Jacob, are you? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and livestock." Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks from this water will get thirsty again, but whoever drinks from the water that I will give him will never get thirsty again. In fact, the water I will give him will become a well of water springing up in him for eternal life." "Sir," the woman said to him, "give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and come here to draw water." "Go call your husband," he told her, "and come back here." "I don't have a husband," she answered. "You have correctly said, 'I don't have a husband,'" Jesus said, "for you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you said is true." "Sir," the woman replied, "I see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say that the place to worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus told her, "Believe me, woman, an hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. But an hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Jesus told her, "I, the one speaking to you, am he." Just then his disciples arrived, and they were amazed that he was talking with the woman. Then the woman left her water jar, went into town, and told the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" And they made their way to him. In the meantime, the disciples kept urging him, "Rabbi, eat something." But he said, "I have food to eat that you don't know about." The disciples said to one another, "Could someone have brought him something to eat?" "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work," Jesus told them. Now many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of what the woman said. "He told me everything I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. Many more believed because of what he said. And they told the woman, we no longer believe because of what you said, since we have heard for ourselves and know that this really is the Savior of the world. Let's pray for understanding. Dear Heavenly Father, help us understand why this particular event was recorded and placed in your word. Help us to hear from you personally today as we look at this passage. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You can be seated. So the question that we're asking today is, what does God really want? What's his motive? What's he after? You ever wondered that? You ever had something happen in your life and say, "Okay, God, what are you doing? What is this about? What's the point of this?" I've had many moments where I've literally asked that question, sometimes to myself, sometimes directed right toward God. And so that's the answer, that's the question and the answer that we want to look for today is, what is God really after? Because everything else doesn't really matter. What's interesting about this story is sometimes we read the story and it's just a nice little cool account of Jesus talking to this lady, but there's some amazing things that were going on here. First of all, just a little background. You heard a little reference in the story about Jews and Samaritans. They didn't get along so well. So here was the deal. Several hundred years earlier, Israel had been removed from their nation. They had been captured by the Assyrian Empire and then later by the Babylonian Empire. When they were removed from their nation, there was another group that was resettled in there, and most of them were not Jewish. They came from other places. They had other religions. but they mixed in with some of the remaining very poor Jews who were left in the land. So they were kind of a, for the Jews would actually say they were a half-breed. They weren't really Jews. And then not only that, they incorporated kind of a mixture of worship of other gods and worshiping the true God. And so they religiously, ethnically, there was some division there. But one of the biggest problems was it was a very painful time in Israelite history. And so every time they met a Samaritan, they just looked at them and they disdained them. They didn't like that. Ironically, at this time, the Samaritans kind of live in the middle section of Israel. And so here's Samaria. Beneath it is Judea and Jerusalem. And up top is the area of Galilee. So you hear about Jesus doing things in Galilee, and you hear a lot about Jerusalem. You don't hear much about in between there. And so they often they would have to go through that area. But many times the Jews, there was another route they could take that ran along the Jordan River. They could bypass Samaria. They could literally go a different path. In fact, that was the more frequent path, and it was just as accessible. And so often the Jews, because they didn't like going through that area, they didn't like those people anyway, they would go the different path. But what we read here in John chapter 4, it says, when Jesus left Judea, so he's in the southern part, and he's going to travel to the northern part of Galilee, it says he had to travel through Samaria. But I want you to understand something here. He didn't really have to go through Samaria. Not the way we would think of it. Not like, if I'm going to get to that step right there, I'm going to have to take one particular path. There are alternative routes. There are ways that I can go about that. And so Jesus, for other reasons than just geography and the necessary way of traveling, said I had to go through Samaria. I love, most of the time, the old King James Version needs some updating to kind of hit our heart language. We don't speak Shakespeare in English anymore. But this is one particular passage where I love how it translates the Greek words there. If you read in John chapter 4, verse 4, in the King James Version, it says, he must needs go through Samaria. You like that phrase? Must needs. And so what was happening is there was an intentional desire. There was something that Jesus wanted unusually. There was something he was after in particular in this particular story. Now, often we read about Jesus making some big moments, like when Jesus decided he was going to pick his 12 disciples. You heard about Peter and James and John. It says the night before he went up on a mountain and he prayed. And there was a lot of intensity and focus. And we say, well, that's, he had to pick out some important people. That same idea is right here in John chapter 4, where Jesus said, I'm going after someone in particular. There's someone of tremendous importance that I must meet. And what's ironic, though, is for a Jew, for that person to be a Samaritan was like, why would you need to meet a Samaritan? Why would you need to do that? But it says he had to travel through Samaria. This was on the heart of God. We looked last week at how Jesus only does what God had told him is the next thing in his plan. So he was responding to God's leading. That's why he had to go there. This particular place, this particular woman he was going to meet was on God's heart. Now here's one thing I want us to see just from the very beginning. And as we discover what it means to be right with God and to follow his will. And that is that I have not looked for God. If I know anything about God, if I have the slightest inclination towards God, here's what you know, here's what I can know. I'm not the one who's been looking for God. He's come looking for me. There's a lot of passages I could give you. In fact, I had trouble kind of narrowing down where we're going to focus. But there's another story in Hosea. That's an Old Testament prophet. And in Hosea, a prophet was told that he was supposed to go as a symbol of God's relationship with Israel and pick out a wife who was a prostitute. What? Yeah, exactly. You heard what I just said. He was to go find someone who was a prostitute and marry her. And then he said, and God told this prophet, he says, and then by the way, she's going to leave you again. So it's unheard of. It's an amazing gesture that a prophet, a man of God, would go marry a prostitute. He would choose her to be his bride. And then she's going to run off anyway and leave him. And he says, then I want you to go, and then chapter 3, I want you to go after her again. And as you hear that story, if you go back and read the book of Hosea, what you're going to find is, why did God have that prophet do that? Because it was a picture of how God relates with us. You see, often we feel like sometimes that either I'm so unworthy of God that he would never want me, and that's not true, because we see the prophet choosing this prostitute. We see God choosing us even though we have nothing. But the bigger thing is that sometimes we feel like, well, yeah, of course God kind of chose me. He saw, the goodness in me. And the truth of the matter is that no, we actually don't bring anything to God. There's no reason that he should choose us, but he does anyway. And so if you ever have any inclination towards God, if you think, I want to be right with God, I kind of hear God, then you know that God is working in your life. I'll give you 2 other verses here that shows this. In Romans chapter 3, verse 11, it says that there is no one who seeks after God. There's no one who is right within him. No one who's trying to find him. You say, no one? I thought I sought after God, a little bit. I think I know certain people who sought after God. Well, then in John chapter 6, verse 44, we read this. It says, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. So how do you reconcile those 2 verses? No one is seeking after God. If somebody is coming to God, that's proof that God is drawing them. The answer is this. You and I did not go looking for God. Not a single one of us. God came looking for us. We were lost and weren't even seeking help. And God came after us. And we're going to find in the next few weeks story after story in the Bible and many accounts of where God came looking for somebody. God chased them down. He came after them. I want you to think about that, because that changes the nature of our relationship with God. If you think you kind of earned your way in, or you feel like that there's something you have to do or that you have done that kind of gets you connected back to God, to understand that you and I have nothing to offer God, but that he has come looking for us for just reasons of his own choosing, that's just amazing to me. And this is one example. Jesus had to go through Samaria. We're down in verse 7. Jesus had sat down at a well, and it was about noon, so it's the hottest part of the day. And a woman from Samaria came to draw water. Now here's a couple things that we can already gather. One is that she's a Samaritan, Jesus is a Jew. No connection. She is a woman, he's a man. In that culture, not equal at all. Don't talk to each other. And then not only that, she's not even following the typical practices of the day. Typically, you would go draw water in the morning before it got hot. Carrying water is heavy, hot work. And she's coming at noon. We think that she probably was coming at noon to avoid the other people who would come at that time, because we find out she's not on great standing morally in her community. And so this is the situation, and it says she came to draw water, and Jesus does something unusual. He says, give me a drink. You say, what's so unusual about that? He spoke to her. He began a conversation. You ever, been on a plane or you've been somewhere where, there were people around you, but like you're a little bit introverted and you don't really want to talk. It's possible to sit next to somebody on a plane. I know, because I've done this for a couple hours, and neither one of you says the word to the other. Sometimes that's the way you both want it, right? I mean, it's just, you've got your space, I got mine. Don't let your elbows touch mine. We'll just exist in close proximity for a few hours, and then we'll go on our anonymous ways. All right, we'll do our own thing. And that could have happened here. He could have been sitting here, and this woman came, and they looked at each other, put her bucket in the well and drew the water, and kind of look at each other and then move on. That probably would have been the normal cultural exchange. Jew, Samaritan, man, woman. We're not going to talk. Don't need to talk. We have no reason to connect here. But they did talk. And why? Because Jesus began the conversation. He was the greater of the two. It was an unequal relationship in many ways. Culturally, men had a higher standing than women in that day. The Jews obviously felt of themselves better than the Samaritans. And he was the Son of God, and yet he began this conversation. Give me a drink. And so that's a polite thing. Could I have a drink? Is basically what he was doing. Could I have a drink? And then she immediately recognizes that he's broken all the cultural norms of the day. How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? She touches on all those things. What are you doing talking to me? That's basically what she was saying. And Jesus said, if you knew the gift of God, and who is saying to you, you knew who I was, saying, give me a drink, you would ask him. You wouldn't just help him out and be polite to him, but you would ask something of him, and he would give you living water. See, that's the thing I think most of us don't understand, what an amazing thing it is that the God of the universe would relate with us at all. There is no reason, you realize that God has no need for us. I've heard people talk about how that, why did God reach out to us? That he needed a relationship with us. Did not need a relationship with us, folks. He wanted a relationship, but he had no need. The God of the universe has no needs. He's doing just fine. But yet he chose us anyway. That's what's so amazing about this. And so the next thing that we see here is that God relentlessly pursues and initiates a relationship with me. You ever think about that? That God relentlessly pursues and initiates a relationship with you. That's amazing. That Jesus would initiate a conversation, and he went out of his way just to be here, just to meet this woman. Then he begins to talk to her. And it's not a normal just hello conversation where they nod and go on their ways. Like he begins to really engage her. In 1 John chapter 4, verse 10 and 19, we see these phrases here. It says, love, true love, consists in this. Not that we love God, but that he loved us. Sometimes we have good feelings toward God. We have good vibes toward Jesus, right? But really, when we really look at it, we haven't loved God. The way we have a relationship with God loved us. He sent his son to die for us. And because he went first, look, it says we love because he first loved us. When you have two unequals together, when one of you is definitely more beautiful and more intelligent than the other one, you can't say, I love you, and hope that that's going to be reciprocated. You want that person needs to go first. Jesus went first in this relationship. He goes first. He went first in your relationship. He went first in me, and he has relentlessly pursued us. I think most of us, if we're honest, we can look back and go, I remember a time when I felt like God was speaking to me. When you feel like God is speaking to you, do you know where that's coming from? You didn't do anything good, and that's why God was now talking to you. God was reaching out to you. God was drawing you. God was hunting you down. God was looking for you. He knew where you were, but you weren't even looking for him, but he was coming for you. That's what's so huge in our relationships here. He goes on, and they have this engaging conversation about water. She's like, what are you talking about? You'll give me water. You don't even have a bucket. You got nothing to get out of that well there. Where are you going to get this living water? Are you greater than Jacob? That's our great ancestor. And then Jesus continues to talk about this. Everyone who drinks from this water, this physical only, will get thirsty again. But whoever drinks from the water that I will give him will never get thirsty again. In fact, it'll be an unending well springing up in him for eternal life. So she said, well, yeah, I'm interested. I'd love to have some of that water. I don't want to get thirsty anymore. I don't want to have to come here to this well anymore. I don't want to have to duck out on what is my unaccepted stance here in this community. And so then, all of a sudden, Jesus gets personal. Go call your husband. Come back here. Often, I would love to I want a relationship with God, but I would like to keep God at arm's length. You ever feel that way? I want a relationship with God. I would really love it if he would fix a couple of areas of my life, but there's a couple parts of my life that either it's going so well that I don't want him to mess with it, or it is so messy that I don't even want him to see it. So we don't even talk about that. And so often in our dating relationships, you know, we put the best side forward. You know, we don't talk about our bad stories. We're not fully real with somebody that we're beginning a relationship with. And often we kind of want to do that with God. God, I'm going to come to church once in a while, and man, you know that stuff I've messed up, you know, a few years ago, but we're not going to go there. Let me just come. I'll come to church. I'm going to give you that hour, and I might even stay 10 minutes afterwards, like that Pastor keeps bugging us to do, and you know, and I'm going to do that. But then after that, like, all right, I'm back into my life. And we wake up Monday morning and we deal with the work and the pressures and the stresses of things. We feel like, well, that's my life. That's my real life. That's the stuff I got to do. I can't expect God to really care about that or want to get engaged in that, or I don't even know what that would mean to follow him in that area. And so we don't worry about that. Here's what I want us to see here today, is that Jesus wants to get very personal and real with you and me. Whatever is the darkest thing in your life, Jesus wants you to talk about that with him. Now, not because he wants to beat you over the head, but it needs to be dealt with. The elephant that's in the room between you and God, he wants to deal with that. He wants there to be no conversations that are off bounds. So when he said, go and call your husband and come back here, in other words, Jesus was saying, hey, if you want to find out about this life-changing living water, well, that's just something that's going to, impact your whole family. Like I can't just tell you, if you dabble with this, like you're going to have to, your whole family's going to need, there's going to be changes coming. So go get your husband and let's talk about that. But he was also touching on a nerve. I don't have a husband, she said. That's a quick way of kind of dealing with her situation as it begins to unfold. And then Jesus said, you've correctly said, I don't have a husband. For you've had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you said is true. Man, he's not just preaching anymore, is he? He's meddling. I mean, he is into her life. Can you imagine the darkest, most uncomfortable part of your life? You began talking to a stranger, and within 2 minutes, they give you very clear indication that they know exactly who you are and what you've done. How do you feel? I want to leave. I'm not comfortable with that at all. I don't like that at all. Like, who are you? And so that's what she immediately responds, like, sir, I see that you are a prophet. Whoa, how do you know this? But then she immediately changes the conversation. Look at verse 19 and verse 20. I see you are a prophet. But verse 20, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say the place to worship is in Jerusalem. You know what she just did there? She just did no, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to go talk about religious doctrine. So, moving on out of in-person, let's go on to something a little bit different here. Let's not talk about my love life right now. Let's talk about religion. And I know you Jews, you have this particular doctrine. You think that the most special place to worship God is in Jerusalem, but we Samaritans, we have this mountain. We think that's the place where we meet with God, and that's and that's the big difference we have. So that's probably where we're going to have to end this conversation. What was she? Often in our relationship with God, we do this. God pursues us. He chases us down. He's initiating a relationship. He puts his finger on the most painful, dark time of our life, the part that we feel the most guilty about, the part that we just figure, well, God can do everything in my life except that. And the second he does, most of the time we want to, let's move on to something else. Okay, God, we're not going to talk about that, but I'm going to go to church the next 4 weeks in a row. I'm going to take that try 3 thing and go, I'm going to try 4. I'm going to do that. Let me do that, and let's just leave this area alone. Let's not get too real. Let's not get too personal here. And Jesus ignores her attempt. He does not get into a doctrinal conversation about, well, actually, the correct place to worship God. He basically says, well, the place is irrelevant. It's about the person. But he punts on that. He goes on that. I want to encourage you, sometimes as we're trying to share our relationship with God with other people, we get into doctrinal issues, philosophical issues. And that is almost never really the issue that's in somebody's life. There may have been somebody out there, but very few people have come to God because there's some intellectual argument or doctrine that they have heard said in a persuasive way, and they went, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, okay? I really do believe in the Trinity now. Okay, I'll believe in Jesus. That's the only thing holding me back. Most of the time it's something personal in life. I went through this horrible thing that happened in my life. I was abused, or I had this happen, or I've committed these particular sins, and I don't think that I can really have a relationship with God. I think that's beyond my capability. They're not going to say that. That's not really what comes out, but that's really what's behind things here. And Jesus says, well, you know what? It's not about worshiping on this mountain in Jerusalem. That's not really the issue. Now, as God himself, you think he knew the correct doctrine? He knew the correct place to worship? Sure he did. And he says, but the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. It's not about where you worship, but it's the way you worship. The Father wants such people to worship him. He wants a real relationship with you. You realize that you can come to church, some of you maybe even right now, I don't know, but you and God know. You're coming here right now, but like you're here because somebody drugged you, or you're here just to, put in your hour and then get back with your life. Like you're not really worshiping God. It's possible. I've attended church and not worshiped God. I've done that. There have been times where I've preached sermons and not worshiped God. I'm not proud of that. I don't like that, but that's the reality, right? We can certainly do that. So the issue is not our religion. It's not about those particular things here. The Father wants people to worship him in spirit and in truth. He wants people who are real, people who are honest. He wants God himself to touch every last real issue of your life and my life. He wants to talk about everything. He doesn't want there to be any stories of your life that I can't share that one with you. You're not a part of that. You realize that every relationship that you have, it can only go as deep as to the extent that you are known and loved in spite of whatever that means. So in other words, like if you can have a relationship with somebody as long as they never find out about this particular story, then your relationship can't go that deep because you can't share that part of your life with them. If your relationship would be over if they found out that's not a real great relationship, is it? And most of us, though, what we do is we figure, well, I would rather have half relationships with all these different people and keep certain components separate, because if everybody saw the real me and knew everything that I've got going on, it'd be over with. And here's what we know, and it bothers us in a relationship with God. We know that God knows everything about our lives. But sometimes we feel like if I ignore that and don't talk to God about that at least I can have this partial relationship with God. And here's what God is saying to you and to me. I know. And I'm still here. I know. And I'm still coming after you. Let's talk about it, though. Let's not ignore it. Yeah, it's not good what you did. Yeah, that's a mess. That would have kept us from having a relationship. But I've done something about that. Let's talk about that. God wants people to worship him in spirit and truth. He wants a real, personal love relationship. He does not want just a religion of compliance. He wants to know you. He does know you. He wants you to know him. He wants in on all the stuff that's gone on in your life, past, present, and future. And then they go on here. The woman says, well, I know that the Messiah is coming, who's called the Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Jesus said, I'm the guy. The one you've been hearing about who will come. I'm the guy. And just then his disciples arrived. They were amazed that he was talking with the woman. What in the world's going on here? And then instantly that woman left her water jar. She forgot about why she had been there, went into the town and started telling everybody, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. I don't know if this is the best way to start sharing your testimony. Come see somebody who knows everything about, your darkest secret ever. I know somebody who knows that, That's not like, most of us would be like, I don't know if I want to go talk to that person. But she's amazed at that. This is a person who knows everything about her and did not reject her. This is somebody who knew her darkest sins and yet wanted to talk to her. That's what she was saying here. Come see a man who told me everything I ever did, and he still talked to me. Could this be the Messiah? It was enough. Whatever they heard, they came to Jesus. And then his disciples are telling him, aren't you hungry, Jesus? And I've got food you don't even know about. I'm energized. Why? What's happening? Well, my food is to do the will of him who sent me to finish his work. I'm doing what God wants me to do. This is what it's about. When you're really in love, when you're really connecting with somebody there, sometimes you forget to eat, or you don't care whether you eat at this time or that time, but there's something bigger that's going on. And it says, now many Samaritans believed in him because of what the woman had said. He told me everything I ever did. Like, they began to believe that he's the Messiah. And so they came and they asked Jesus to stay with them 2 days. What's interesting is there were places, we won't look at one of those stories today, but there's a place where they asked Jesus to leave. One time Jesus healed a guy from demon, and the people in the town came out and they said, we want you to get out of here. In other words, they saw that he transformed lives, but we don't know what you're going to do next. So I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with the uncomfortableness of the transformation that you may bring. Sometimes we're like that. Sometimes Jesus says to us, like he said to a blind guy, do you want to be healed? Sometimes we don't want to be healed because that means I have to actually have the spiritual surgery. I have to talk to God and admit about my past and what's happened. We're the ones who don't want the relationship. God is willing to deal with that and to roll up his sleeves and get into the mess with us. He wants to have a messy relationship with us. Often we don't. It says many believe because of this, but many more believe because of what he said. And they told the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. We've heard for ourselves and know that this really is the Savior of the world. Here was a group of people. The Samaritans were the last people that you would have thought would have heard about the Messiah. They didn't really worship the correct way. They were not the Jewish people that Jesus was coming to first. And then you have one of the most immoral people of this particular town who is the conduit to first hear about Jesus and then share about a relationship with him. It's so unlikely. And why did Jesus do that? I think Jesus did that not because he's saying, well, look how bad this woman was, so certainly he could probably love you because you're not that bad. I think he's saying, look at what kind of bad people I come to. That's who you are, and it's okay. It's not okay what you've done, but it's okay because of what I will do about that. He wants a real personal love relationship with us, not a religion of mere compliance. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14 and 15, it says, for the love of Christ compels us. In other words, when you understand that God loved you so much that he hunted you down, that he kept chasing you, and he's now sharing his love with you. It says that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for the one who died for them and was raised. It changes your life. It absolutely changes everything. There's nothing else that you can stand on when you really know this. And so we're going to finish up really early today. Most of you are thinking, like, what else is he going to go do for 30 minutes here? Here's what I want you to do. We're almost done. I want you to think about this. How have you seen that God has come looking for you? Where have you noticed in your life that you had the slightest inclination towards God? You didn't get that on your own. That's God pulling you. That was God coming to talk to you. Why did you come here today? Not just on your own choosing. God said, come to me. God has been relentlessly pursuing and initiating a relationship with you. Do you see that? Can you think of all the times that he's done this, how he's initiated that? And what he wants is a real, personal love relationship. What do you need to talk to Jesus about? Have you been afraid to talk to him about? What parts of your life have you been afraid to let him get right in there with you? One of the things I love about you as a church family is, for many of you, I've seen how you started off, you were attending church, you were doing the compliance thing, kind of circling God a little bit, and yet at some point you finally gave up. You went, "Hey God, I'm going to let you come in and just deal with the mess." And you've been honest about who you have been and what you've been and what you've done, and God just got in there and just did a miracle. And that's really true for every one of us. It's not just true for the worst of us. It's true for every one of us that God does this. And then when we share with others, what we're sharing is not, "Hey, here's how you need to begin to behave." You can't behave your way to God. You come to God and say, "God, my life is a wreck, and yet you love me. Wow." And so the question today is what have you heard God say to you? This wasn't about us coming to church and going through a religious performance. This is about us hearing from the real God. He recorded this story in his word so that we would know that he is alive and well, and this story was shared today because he wanted you to realize that he's coming after you. Jesus must needs be at sole purpose in Bealeton on this day to talk to you, to talk to me. What did you hear God say to you? And then how will you respond? I want to ask you if you would do this. Take your connection card out, and at the very bottom, right above prayer request, it says, "Today I heard God say." I'll let you fill in the blank. Maybe there was one phrase in the text that we looked at today. Maybe you heard God say something that I didn't even physically say today. But identify what you heard God say to you today. And we didn't even put the line on there, but right beneath that, what I would encourage you to do is to add this. Today I will. I heard God say he loved me no matter what. Today, I'm going to talk to God about what happened 3 years ago. Today, I'm going to quit trying to perform my way into pleasing God. I'm just going to say yes to his love. How do you want to respond to his love? Today I heard God say, "Today I will."